All right, the title of our lesson is The Call of Moses. Last week we studied the birth of Moses. And so you take from last week's lesson to this week's lesson, 8 decades has taken place. 80 years from Moses' birth until the call of Moses take place. Moses is 80 years old now, and this is kind of the setting of our lesson there. The call of Moses. You know, we're never too old to do a work for Jesus. It doesn't make any difference how old we are, but you know, as long as we're left here, God has something for us to do. And so I'm not quite 80 years old, but you know, I'm getting there. And we have one person that's in the congregation that is 80 years old and more. But you know, she's still here, and you know, there's still work to be done. And no matter how old we are, as long as we're here on earth, our job is to serve God in whatever respect He has for us to serve. And so don't ever think that we can just quit and sit down and take it easy, because in God's kingdom that won't happen until death comes to us. So that's very important to think about there. Our memory verse: for the Son of Man is come to seek and to save that which was lost. If we have time, I'll speak on that in a little bit. The emphasis, I'm going to read the adult emphasis and then read the junior emphasis right behind it. At the close of Moses' second 40 years, when he was 80 years old, and an event occurred which changed his life completely and lifted it from the plane of the ordinary to the heights of greatness in the service of God. In God's perfect timing, Moses met and obeyed God. The junior emphasis is God called Moses to lead the Israelites out of Egypt. Woo, what a task. What a task for an 80-year-old man. But that's what God expected of him. And, you know, we might think, oh, well, I'm too old. I'm too old to do anything, you know. Well, you know, if God calls us, it's in His time. He knows whether we're capable of doing it or not. If we're not capable of doing it or not, then He's not going to have us to do it. So if He calls us to do something, He knows that we are capable to do that. But it's only with His help. And that's one thing that we have to keep into consideration, is it's only through Him that we can do that. You know, Moses tried to take care of things earlier in his life, and that's the reason why he wound up down taking care of his father-in-law's sheep, is because he tried to do things on his own. And that wasn't the timing that God had for him. And so, but now is the time. So we're going to get started here, Exodus chapter 3, verse 1. Now Moses kept the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the backside of the desert and came to the mountain of God, even to Horeb. And the angel of the Lord appeared unto him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. And he looked, and behold, the bush burned with fire, and the bush was not consumed. And Moses said, I will now turn aside and see this great sight, why the bush is not burnt. You know, if we see a fire, we know that it has to have fuel. And I know when I am burning in my fireplace, I've got to have some kind of fuel in there. You know, paper. A lot of times we'll get a fire started. I like to get paper and little sticks and maybe some bark and, you know, stuff like that. Leaves. I usually don't try to get leaves, but, you know, leaves will burn too. But then, and then how quickly that burns up then. And then it starts your bigger log then, you know, and then that's what keeps the fire going is that. But you know, you have to add a log every now and then. Have you ever noticed that? It'll consume what it's burning, and you'll have to add a log every now and then. Well, this fire was a little bit different. It just kept burning. That bush never did burn up, never was consumed, just kept burning, and that's what got Moses' attention there. Moses was herding his father-in-law Jethro's sheep, and he was near the mountain of God. It was called that because of what happened later, something we will read about in another lesson. The mountain's name was Horeb, I think I'm saying that right, or Sinai. Suddenly Moses saw a fire in a bush. It was a different fire than Moses had ever seen before. The fire did not consume the bush. Moses went over to see why. You know, wouldn't that kind of work up your curiosity? Well, there's a fire over there. Well, when it gets that bush burned up, why, it'll go out. You know, it's in the desert. And looked over there a few minutes, sometime later, and it was still burning. Well, that'd get your curiosity. Well, let's go see what's going on over there. So that's what happened there. And so in verse 4, and when the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called unto him out of the midst of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here am I. You know, it's a comforting thing when somebody calls your name, you know. Here, somebody was calling Moses' name, Moses, Moses. Do you remember when Samuel was called? Samuel, Samuel, and he goes running into Eli, remember? Well, Eli finally realized what was going on, and what did Eli tell Samuel to say? That's the Lord talking to you. You say, Here am I, here's your servant, or something to that fact. Well, evidently, Moses thought the same thing, because he says, Here am I. And verse 5, and he said, Draw not nigh hither. Put off your shoes from off thy feet, for the place whereon thou standeth is holy ground. Moreover, he said, I am the God of thy father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look upon God. And you know, he was only being human. You know, I'm in the presence of God, you know, which is a glorious thing, but it is a fearful thing to know that you're in the presence of God in a way of reverence. Okay, this is serious. This is more than just a fire in a bush, you know. And that's kind of what Moses was kind of looking at here. This is more than just a fire. This is God here. God speaks to Moses. Why was the fire different? It was because God sent it to draw Moses' attention. God called Moses, Moses. Moses answered, Here am I. You know, if God would call you, Larry, what am I to do? Say, Here am I. Here am I. You know, I think, was it Amos or Isaiah? One of who the Lord said, "Who will I send?" Well, here am I. That prophet. I can't remember which one it was, but that what. Isaiah. Okay. Thanks for the help there. Isaiah says, "Here am I." You know, that's the way we need to be. Is here am I. Here am I. Don't be like Adam, try and hide yourself. You see what happened on that respect. It didn't work. God still found him. But, you know, here am I, and bring it out into the open. That's exactly what Moses done. He was ready to listen, ready to obey. You know, that's good advice for us. Let's listen. You know, if somebody's calling, they got something to tell us. And you know, if God's calling us, He's got something to tell us. And we need to pay attention, and we need to listen. And then, when the order comes, or what needs to be done, be ready to obey. And obey. Not just be ready, but and obey too. First, the Lord told him not to come near the bush. Okay, well, stand back then. You know, a lot of times, children don't get too close to the stove. Well, they want to get a little bit closer, and feel that heat off of it, or off the fireplace or whatever it is. They want to feel it. But if God tells us just don't come any closer, okay, we better stay right where we're at then. He must take off his shoes first. Okay, that was to show reverence. Why? It was because the place was holy ground. What made it holy? What made it holy? God was there. God was there. The only thing that makes anything holy is when God is there. In our hearts. We can't holy ourselves. I know I'm not using the right grammar, but we can't holy ourselves, It's God in us that makes us holy. That's the only way that we can be holy, is to have God within our hearts there. God says, God said, "I am the God of thy fathers." And he named off the fathers there, of Abraham, of Isaac, and of Jacob. And, Moses was familiar with them. How do you think he got familiar with them? There was no Bible yet, but Moses had heard the stories of how God had been with Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and the others. How did he hear that? He probably heard it from his mama. Remember, his mother was very, very cautious about how she took care of Moses and put him, do you remember, in the little ark, and all. And probably his dad also, because he was a Levite also. And yes, they were in terrible, perilous times of slavery and all this, but they had time for God and had time to teach their children. I really do feel that. What did Moses do? He hid his face. This great God, this good God, this mighty God, he was afraid to look upon God. He hid his face, afraid to look upon God. This was more than a sign of reverence. It was really reverence in his heart. It was the fear of God. We can show reverence in church by sitting and being quiet and all. And we may not have a bit of reverence in our heart at all. But that's what really counts, is whether the reverence is in our heart or not. That's what's most important. And if it's in our heart, it's going to spill out into our being anyway. But that's where we need to show real reverence, is in our hearts. And make sure that we do have a reverence and a fear of God. A reverence, fear of God. When we are in the presence of God. And you know, if we have God with us, that's easy to do. And when we have God with us, we have God with us all the time. So therefore we need to show reverence all the time. That's what's most important there. You know, when Stephen was being stoned, I'm going to read scripture here where Stephen was being stoned, and he brought out this story about Moses. That's found in Acts 7:30 and through 33. And he's talking about Moses here. And when 40 years were expired, there appeared to him in the wilderness of Mount Sinai an angel of the Lord in the flame of fire in a bush. When Moses saw it, he wondered at the sight. And as he drew near to behold it, the voice of the Lord came unto him, saying, I am the God of thy fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. Then Moses trembled and durst not behold. Then said the Lord to him, Put off your shoes from thy feet, for the place where thou standest is holy ground. See, Stephen, this story was brought all the way to Stephen's time. And Stephen was telling these people that were about to stone him, this is the same, I'm serving the same God that Moses served, that Jacob served, that Isaac served, and that Abraham served. All that went backwards that way. He says, only he went forward, but they always look back to Abraham. They were the children of Abraham. Well, I'm serving the same God. But, they didn't believe that, They had in their own minds their own little agenda. And we can see here in America that there's little agendas that turns out to be big agendas that people are trying to force and saying that they're serving God. And we need to keep our eyes on God at all times, just like Stephen did here. It may cost us our life. It cost Stephen his life, but still he stood firm and stood steady on that, which is very important. God is a consuming fire, but it is sin and enemies that he consumes, not his children. That's very important. The point to the unconsumed bush is as a symbol of God's people. That's, we can kind of associate that with that if you want to. The dedication the devil and false religions require of their servants is to give themselves to be destroyed. And that's very, very much. To serve sin is to die. I mean, let's just bring it out plain. To serve sin is to die. It is a dedication to denial, sorrow, and death. It is a fire that consumes. That's what it is. The dedication God asks of his servant is to give themselves to be filled and used, or useful, we can say. God wants to use us, not to consume us. See, that's the difference. It is a dedication to growth, fulfillment, usefulness, freedom, and life. If a child of God must suffer persecution or death for his fulfillment to God in a sinful world, it is only to be raised up to a fuller life. That's what we can put our stock into, into a fuller life. You know, when you want to invest money, you want it to do the best it can. Or invest in whatever, in a garden or whatever it is. You want it to do the best it can. And you're going to do everything you can to get the most out of that ground or out of the money or whatever it might be. You're going to do everything. Well, that's what God does for us. You know, we're that ground. We're that talent or whatever. And God wants to get the best that He can get out of it. That's just nature of us. That's the nature of God. The fire of God does not consume them. No life given to Him is lost. He renews as He uses. I like that. He renews as He uses, you know. God gives the grace to perform all that He requires. This ground was holy ground for only one reason. God was there. Nothing else can make anything or any person holy. Many things are called holy for many reasons. Some might be a ceremony performed. They might call that being holy. Or the decision of some person or a board or a characteristic, they might consider that as holy. But if God's not in it, it's not holy. God's got to be in it. You know, when we have a business meeting, we ask God to be in that. Because if God's not in it, then it's just useless to have it then. So it's very important. And you know, that's everything we do in our life, each and every day. Make sure God is in it. Make sure, because if God's not in it, then we're stepping out on our own, and you know what happens there. I've told you many a time. You're gonna get in trouble. These that I just mentioned here make nothing holy. No place or thing or person remains holy if God has departed. Yep. Simple. I can't even say any more of that, because it's pretty simple to understand. The presence of God is all that makes holy. So let's if we don't learn anything today but this, that'll be an accomplishment there. So let's keep that in the forefront of our minds there. Okay, we'll get back to the reading there, Exodus 3 and 7. And the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people which are in Egypt, and have heard their cry by reason of their taskmakers, for I know their sorrows. And I am come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of the land unto a good land and a large, unto a land flowing with milk and honey, unto the place of the Canaanites, and the Hittites, and the Amorites, and the Perizzites, I hope I'm saying that right, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites. I might have missaid some of them, but it's right there in verse 8. You can look at it yourself there and put the pronunciation that needs to be there. Now therefore, behold, the cry of the children of Israel is coming to me, and I have also seen the oppression wherewith the Egyptians oppressed them. Come now, therefore, and I will send thee unto Pharaoh, that thou mayest bring forth my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. Wow. What a job. You know, Moses, probably after hearing all of that, he thought, how am I going to be able to do that? And you know, God might have a job for us to do that had a big list like this, but you know, if we will continue to take God within our hearts and go forth and step out and say, Lord, I know it's a big job. you're going to have to work through me in order for us to get this done. I can't do it on my own. And that's true. We can't do it on our own. But you know, sometimes we always, not sometimes, but we always have to step out in faith when we go about doing that. You know, the first thing that a person might want to do is, oh Lord, I can't do that. There's no way I can do all that. You know what God would tell you? I know it. But with me, you can do it. You know, that's probably what he would say to you. Oh, I know you can't do it, but with me, you can do it. And you know, so you know, there was a big task there. But you know, there was also a promise there too. God promised to deliver Israel. And how many years were they in Egypt down there? I think we kind of figured that out. It was around 430 years down there in Egypt. You know, that's a long time. That's a long time. You know, that's longer than America's been a nation, you know. And, you know, 430 years that they had put up with this and been oppressed but now's the time. And only in God's time is the time right. 40 years earlier, Moses might have tried to deliver Egypt on his own. And you know, that was at 390 years. 390 to 430. But that wasn't the right time. That wasn't the right time. In God's time. Well, that's only 40 years difference, you know, and Moses was more of a younger man and, you know, had more energy and all. But no, it wasn't God's time. And, you know, that's one thing that we should not question is in His time. Because in His time, He will make sure that it gets done. And, you know, let us in His time be ready to work and do what He has for us to do in that time. Whether we think 30 years ago would have been a better time and He's called us now, okay, let's do it now, you know. That's what's most important there. God promised to deliver Israel. My, how these people would be so happy, you know. My, how much they've suffered. Just put yourself in their place. How much we have suffered. Now comes the time that will be great, you know. The Lord told Moses why He had come to him. I have surely seen the afflictions. He'd seen the affliction before, but it wasn't in His time yet. The trouble of my people which are in Egypt. He had heard their cry for help. He cared. He cared. He was answering their prayer. He would deliver them or save them out of their troubles. He would take them out of the Egypt to a land flowing with milk and honey. That's what our verses was saying there. A land full of good things. That land was Canaan, the same land God had promised to Abraham. Remember? God promised Abraham. That was in Genesis 12 and 7. And it's not in your quarterly, but I'm going to read it. And the Lord appeared unto Abram and said, Unto thy seed will I give this land. And there built he an altar unto the Lord who appeared unto him. So, you know, there was several parts to this promise that the Lord had made. The first one was found in verse 7. I have seen the affliction of the people. That was the first thing. And I know their sorrows. That was what God told him. What was he going to do next? Yeah, he's seen the affliction. He's seen that for 400 years, you know. But now he says, I am come down to deliver them out of the Egyptians. That was the second part. I'm come to do something about it, you know. That's what he's saying. And then the third part. And what's he going to do? Deliver them? Bring them to the wilderness? And then leave them? No, he's going to take them to a place that is a whole lot better than where they're at now. I mean, it's like day and night. It's like hell to heaven is what it's kind of like. That's how different it was. And bring them to a place that's flowing with milk and honey there, he says. And he says, and he reassures him, and he says, I have also seen, in verse 9, I have also seen the oppression wherewith the Egyptians oppressed the people with them. And then he tells Moses, he says, I will send thee unto Pharaoh, that thou mayest bring forth my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. So he reassures that again and says, you're going to be the one. You're going to be the one. Okay. Moses, was he very happy then? Well, let's look at the Exodus 3:11. And Moses said unto God, who am I that I should go unto Pharaoh? That's the first question that he's coming to say. Who am I? Who am I? But Pharaoh was your adopted father, you know. Well, I think they've changed since this time. But anyway, you know, he says, you're going to go to Pharaoh. And then he says, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh? And that I should bring forth the children of Israel out of Egypt. And God said, certainly I will be with thee. Now there's the comforting right there. You know, if God has a job, and I think Moses kind of lost track of that. If God calls you to do a job, he's going to be with you. But you know, that's the first thing we might say. Well, why do you pick me? You know, I'm the least among saints, you know. Why do you pick me? And that's kind of what Moses, that's kind of a natural reaction, you know. But remember, God told him, says, certainly I will be with thee, and this shall be a token unto thee that I have sent thee. When thou hast brought forth the people out of Egypt, ye shall serve God upon this mountain. Now remember, they're still here at that bush that was burning. See, now don't get away from that. We're still here at that bush burning. And God told Moses all of this. And they're still at that mountain Sinai. And he's telling him, he says, I'm going to bring you back to this mountain to worship. Well, okay. Did Moses put his trust in what God was saying? I think he did. I feel like he really did, because this was very important. You don't see you might see a bush on fire, you know, maybe once a week or once a month or whatever, but you don't see a bush like this one, and you don't, when you walk up to it, if you're close enough to a bush that just catches on fire, it's not going to speak out at you, which this was different. It did. And, you know, Moses says, okay, don't you think at the end of the day that he sat down and he got to thinking, I have had communion with God. I have had conversation with God. God has appointed me, wants me to do a task that I cannot do by myself, but with God, that task can be done. God gives Moses a mission. What a mission. You know, whatever mission God gives to us, you know, we look at this, bringing a whole nation out from under slavery like that is a big task. But you know, if God calls us to do any task, He expects it to be done, and to be done the way He wants it done. And we can only, the only thing we can do is follow Him, make sure we let Him lead in whatever the task may be. Whether we might think it's huge or small, it's all important. And we need to let God lead at all times in that. When God has a work to be done, He uses a person to do it. He had a work. Now He needed a man. He said to Moses, I will send thee that thou mayest bring forth my people out of Egypt. He had saved the baby Moses from death for this work 80 years earlier. 80 years earlier. That's a lifetime for a lot of people, 80 years, But, again, it was in God's time. Moses was surprised. I'm sure, Moses was surprised. He thought, here I am, I tried once and it didn't work, and here I am, 80 years old, herding sheep for my father-in-law, he thought that was it. But no, God still had work for him. How could he lead the Israelites? He asked, who am I that I should bring forth the children of Israel out of Egypt? However, God knew exactly how it would be done. He knew Moses could not do it alone. He said, certainly I will be with thee. God gave him a token to prove that it was really God who was sending him. Moses would serve God on that mountain after bringing the people out of Egypt. Oftentimes we feel inadequate to do God's work. We are. But with following God, things will get done. And there's one more word after that. Right. Will get done right. And that's if we will follow God. We want the job done. But God wants it done right. And if we have God in our heart, we want it done right too. And that's what's most important there. Okay, Exodus 3:13. And Moses said unto God, behold, when I come unto the children of Israel, and shall say unto them, the God of your fathers have sent me unto you, and they shall say to me, what is his name? What shall I say unto them? And God said unto Moses, I am that I am. And he said, thus shalt thou say unto the children of Israel, I am has sent me unto you. God's name. Moses had no Bible as we have to tell him about God. There wasn't no Bibles back then. It was word of mouth. Remember, Jochebed probably was the one that taught. As I mentioned, his mother, Jochebed, was probably the one that taught him or his father there. Others nations worship make-believe gods. That's what they did. Even right there in Egypt, the Egyptians, they didn't serve God. They had make-believe gods, and all around them, the people that was all around them, I think the Edomites was there close, and different ones, but they had their own gods that they served there, but they didn't worship the real God. But the Israelites who knew who God was. Yeah, it probably got blurry at times, but they knew who the real God was. How would he tell his people which God this was? He asked God his name, and God said his name is I Am. It suits him. He is the only real God. He always was, always is, and always will be. He is always the same. You know, there's a verse in there that I change not. I'm the same yesterday, today, forever. That's what God says. He changes not. You know, what goes today goes tomorrow. You know, what's right today is right tomorrow. And, you know, that's one good thing about He doesn't change. I mean, if you change, oh yeah, it's all right today, or it's not all right today, and then later on, next day, oh yeah, it's all right. Wouldn't that be confusing? Or even the other way around. Wouldn't it be so confusing? But you know, God's not that way. What's right today is going to be right until eternity gets here. It'll be the same. No one made Him. No one made God. He just existed. He just is. God's name Jehovah means I am. I am that I am. I am. I am. He's saying, isn't He saying like, I am that Jehovah, I am. Isn't that what God's saying there?
The statement makes it exclusive. I am because I am. There's nothing else before me or after me. I'm self-existent.
Okay.
I exist because I exist.
I exist because I exist. And yes, self-existing. Yes. And so, you know, it's so important to understand, because, you know, all these other gods, they had a starting point. You know, there Baal wasn't in the Garden of Eden, you know. All these other, Muhammad and all these others, they wasn't in the Garden of Eden. God was there in the Garden of Eden. And you know, that goes to show you that He is, I am that I am. Let's just put it that way. God gave Moses 3 miracles to show Pharaoh and the Israelites to prove that God had sent him. You know, Moses went back to Egypt taking his rod with which he would do the miracles. He met Aaron, his brother. Aaron would be Moses' spokesman. They showed the miracles to the Israelites. The people believed them, and so on and so forth there. The 3 miracles was, you know, God told him to throw the rod down, and it became a snake. You know, and Moses fled from it, you know. Well, you know, the snake kind of represents the devil in that respect, you know. And, you know, you want to flee from the devil, you know, but God then told him to pick it up and become a rod again, if you remember that. And then he had his hand put into his breast there, patel, and brought it out, and it was leprous. You know, well, isn't that kind of a sign of sin? You know, being leprosy, it's always been portrayed as sin. And, you know, God told him to put it back in there, and it came back out, and it was just clear as it could be. And then the third one was he turned the water into blood, Dan. Poured the water, and it became blood. It's through Jesus Christ's blood that sin can be conquered and the devil can be whipped, is what that kind of portrays. You can take it as that, but you know, that was kind of an antitype that was shown there. We can kind of take that and thank God that Jesus came to this earth to be able to save us. And if we'll go to our memory verse, let's look at it. For the Son of Man has come to seek and to save that which was lost. The Son of Man, Jesus, that's who he's talking about. is come to seek and to save that which was lost. You know, if he's seeking you, he hasn't found you yet. Right? If you're seeking something, you haven't found it yet. And you're looking for it. But then when you are found, or when you find something, how many times have you lost something, and when you find it, it is so great to have that thing, when otherwise, if it's there all the time, you don't really worry about it. Sometimes you wonder if it kind of gets in the way every now and then, you know. But if you lose it and you really need it, it's very wonderful to find that. And you know, that's the way the Son of Man is. He's seeking that person. He seeked me at one time, and he found me, and because I was lost. And then what did he do? To save that which was lost. He saved me, and I thank the Lord for that. And you know, that's the mission of Jesus. Moses had a mission, that is something he was sent to do. Later, Jesus had a mission too. He was sent from heaven to save people out of sin. How we should thank him for coming to save us. You know, that is one of the most important things. That is the most important thing that we ever did in our life, was to give our heart and life over to Jesus. You know, I say marrying my wife was an important thing, but that wasn't the most important thing. And she understands that. She will say the same thing about herself. That married me, I guess she thinks that's the second most important. But anyway, she says the same thing. But giving our lives to God is most important, and we understand that as most do. Giving our lives, because you know, it makes us that much easier to live with too.
Yes, it helps.
That much easier to live with too. Type, Moses, he took Israel out of slavery and to Canaan. Antitype, Jesus. He takes sinners out of sin and into the church. There's a little quote in between the lines there. Talk of what God does for you, not of what you do for God. I like that very much. There's another little double line on another page. It's on a different page on my quarterly there. It says, you can't get up if you let up. I've said that wrong. You can't keep up if you let up.
Right.
So push forward is my plead with each one. Push forward. Just make sure that you have God with you when you do. Amen.